Part 27. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 261. Sanya ran out and told Guyunjiao. Guyunjiao only thought that the Li family was really sick. She picked up her skirt and hurried into the house. Seeing Mrs. Li lying on the bed, she looked at Mrs. Li's face and asked, "What's wrong?" Li Shi's voice was thin. I feel uncomfortable all over." Guyunjiao frowned slightly and sat down to take a pulse for Mrs. Li. She felt Li Shi's pulse carefully. She was a little stagnant in her heart, and her qi and blood were a little deficient. It wasn't a big problem, and she shouldn't be unable to get up. She glanced at Mrs. Li, seeing Mrs. Li's eyes closed and her eyelashes trembling. She suddenly understood that Mrs. Li was pretending to be sick again. She let go of her hand and got up, looked at Li Shi and said lightly, "You are sick because you are hungry. You don't need to take medicine, just go and eat your own bowl of rice." Guyunjiao left after saying that. Li's face turned red. She bit her lip and couldn't understand. In the past, when she pretended to be sick, Yu Lang couldn't see it. How could her daughter see it? Besides, even if she is pretending to be sick, shouldn't her daughter be warm to her? She couldn't help crying silently on the bed for a while. It's just that his stomach was so hungry that his stomach seemed to be twitching. Mrs. Li got up from the bed and came out weakly. The dishes in the main room were all cleaned up. She walked to the kitchen ill and crookedly, and Osman thus saw her and said hurriedly, "Sister Li, the food is on the stove for you." While eating, Mrs. Li pondered that this trick was useless for her daughter, so what should she do? She really didn't know how to get closer to her son and daughter. The three children were all fed by the nurse, who was also brought to the age of 3 or 4 by the nurse. She occasionally teases the children when she is happy, and her main energy is on taking care of herself and pleasing her husband. She is the best at how to act coquettish to her husband and show her weakness to arouse his love and pity. She also used these tricks in her parents' house since she was a child, coaxing her family to coddle her. But obviously this trick is not good for Guyunjiao. Mr. Li was eating and was troubled. At this time, Yingzi ran in. Osman thus pulled her into her arms. "I just finished eating, don't run around, look at the sweat on your end." As he spoke, he took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat on Yingzi. Yingzi hugged Osman thus and twisted it a few times. "Mother, give me 2 copper coins, and I'm going to buy candy with Sanya." Osman thus tapped Yingzi's forehead, took out 2 copper coins and handed it to Yingzi. "Why are you so greedy, only to eat?" Yingzi giggled and ran out. Seeing how the mother and daughter were getting along, Mrs. Li tried her best to recall. It seemed that none of the 3 children had ever acted coquettishly in her arms. She thought about it carefully. When she was a child, it seemed that she often acted like a spoiled child in her mother's arms. Why can't her children act like a spoiled child? After Mr. Li had eaten, he went back to the house sullenly. At this time, several people from the Xian gang came to the shop in front. All of them came to buy Biao. Biao stops bleeding quickly. They often scratch their hands or hurt where they are carrying containers at the dock. This medicine is very useful. A few people who bought medicine walked and talked. I heard that there are lists everywhere. Whoever can cure King Kang's mother's eyes will be rewarded. Hey, if only I were a doctor, with 1,000 taels of gold, then I won't have to worry about anything in my life. Guyunjiao listened carefully to the words of several people, and thought about it in her heart. Her pharmacy has been open for more than a month, and it has not opened up for a long time. There are not many people who get medicine, and even fewer who come to see a doctor. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 262. If King Kang's mother can be cured, needless to say, the reputation will be released at once, and there will be no worries about losing business in the future. She raised her voice and asked, "Brother, Where is the list of the Kong Palace's medical treatment list that you said? Someone replied, it's on the street, on the side of the yamen, and on the other side of the wharf. Just as Gu Yunjiao was about to go to the street to take a look, she heard Ahu say, Dr. Gu to see? I'll go to the street to reveal the list. After speaking, she strode out. Ahu went as fast as he went and came back quickly. When he came back, there was a person behind him. Ahu handed the list to Gu Yunjiao and pointed to the man behind him, this is the servant of the palace, and if anyone reveals the list, they will be brought back to the palace. Gu Yunjiao said, she didn't even know what illness Kong Wang's mother had, or whether she could cure it. She hurriedly read the list, it only said eye disease and rewards, but there was not much effective information. The servant of the palace kept watching Gu Yunjiao beside her. Gu Yunjiao had to get up, then I'll go to the palace. Lin Chuo came over, I'll accompany Dr. Gu. After entering the palace, Gu Yunjiao was led into a hall. As soon as she entered the door, Gu Yunjiao was stunned. There were already dozens of doctors. Some came here after revealing the list, and some came to the gate of the palace to recommend themselves after hearing the news. At a glance, half of his hair was white. It looks like a medical expert. There is also a beard on half of the chin, which looks mature and stable. Gu Yunjiao made a vague comparison, feeling that her appearance was really incomparable. She walked away silently. Seeing the two young men come in, everyone couldn't help but look over. An old man with white hair and beard asked, are you two also doctors? Lin Chuo replied, I am Dr. Gu's bodyguard. The old man laughed, does this mean that such a young girl is actually a doctor? He shook his head and said nothing. Someone in the crowd snorted, these days, even cats and dogs dare to come out and become doctors. Dr. Zhang of Kylin Hall was also in the crowd, but he didn't speak. Just eyes twinkled. Gu Yunjiao just pretended she didn't hear it, she didn't even catch a chair after she came in, she just stood beside her silently. Lin Chuo stood in the corner not far away, feeling indignant for Gu Yunjiao. He felt that Gu Yunjiao's medical skills were no worse than most people here, but because she was a woman and young, everyone despised her. While the doctors in the room were making a lot of noise, Butler Wang came over. The hall fell silent immediately. Butler Wang didn't have much respect for these doctors, he just shrugged his hands and said, dear doctors, concubine Yun's illness has been seen by the imperial doctor, but she is blind, and now she is almost blind in both eyes. I don't know if there is a way for you to restore your mother's sight. When they heard that they were blind, many doctors shook their heads. There is no cure for this disease, and there is no prescription for this disease in any medical book. Butler Wang glanced around the room and said, concubine Yun's phoenix is precious and precious. The palace has found a few peasant women with similar symptoms to those of concubine Yun. Whoever cures the peasant woman can heal her. The doctors were discussing for a while, Gu Yunjiao lowered her eyes thoughtfully. At this time, someone stood up and said, the disease of blindness can be cured below. Butler Wang said, oh, are you sure? The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded, sure. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jin Kui. Chapter 263. Butler Wang said with a smile, our Lord said that if the Empress is cured, in addition to the gold 1,000 taels, there will be other rewards. He then straightened his face, however, if you come to our palace to cheat, eat, drink, and use drugs indiscriminately, the palace will never let it go easily. Originally, most people thought of trying it out. If the Empress was cured, it would be 1,000 taels of gold. Even if it can't be cured, as long as the recipe doesn't go wrong, it's fine. When Butler Wang said this, the doctors in the room were all overwhelmed. The person who stood up before did not know when, and shrank back again. Gu Yunjiao looked extremely hesitant. The disease of blindness is called cataract in modern medicine. She knows how to treat it, but she has not treated it by herself, so she is not sure. Butler Wang glanced at the whole room and was greatly disappointed. At this moment, all these doctors have become tortoises with their heads shrinking. He narrowed his eyes and looked at it. Dr. Ye, you are the most famous doctor in Xiangcheng. Concubine Yun's eye disease, can you cure it? Dr. Ye gave a wry smile. Even if the imperial doctor can't cure the empress, what kind of virtue can I do? If the disease starts at the beginning, it may be possible to delay it with medication, but when it's almost blind, there's no way to do it. Butler Wang was greatly disappointed. At this time, Dr. Zhang from Kailantang glanced at Gu Yunjiao and suddenly said, "We have a genius doctor here who can save even the dead. Why don't we stand up and treat concubine Yun?" Recently, shopkeeper's son complained every day that the business in the store was much worse. He also felt this way, and the two agreed that all business had been lost to Rengzintang. Moreover, the dying patient was rescued by Gu Yunjiao last time, and he was very afraid of Gu Yunjiao in his heart. Fearing that Gu Yunjiao's reputation will affect his job in the future. At this time, Dr. Zhang had an idea. Since the little girl bumped into him, why not kill her? Holding her high, if she refuses to be cured, she will definitely make the prince unhappy. If it is not cured, the prince will also be offended. This is called a knife to stretch the head, and a knife to shrink the head is also a knife. Butler Wang hurriedly asked, which genius doctor saved even the dead? Dr. Zhang looked in the direction of Gu Yunjiao. It's the owner of Renzintang, Dr. Gu. Butler Wang was slightly startled when he heard the words of Renzintang. He naturally knew that Zhang Yuzi lived in Renzintang. Now Zhang Yuzi is the king's guest, and the king's attitude towards Zhang Yuzi is almost catching up with Mr. Lu's. He is also very respectful to Zhang Yuzi now. Butler Wang looked over and saw only a little girl standing there alone. When he saw it was a little girl, he thought to himself, isn't this nonsense? However, he still asked, can Dr. Gu cure the nephew's blindness? Gu Yunjiao hesitated for a moment, then told the truth, there is a way to cure it, but I have never personally cured this disease, so I am not 100% sure. As soon as she finished speaking, all the doctors looked at her. Someone said, if there is no 10%, wouldn't it be 70 or 80%? That's still great. Someone sneered, even Dr. Ye, who is recognized as the first doctor in Xiangcheng, dare not say this, a little girl with such a big face. Don't be ashamed. That's right, even the imperial doctor and Dr. Ye can't cure it. The little girl really doesn't know how high the sky is. Even the famous Dr. Dr. Ye couldn't help but ask, does Dr. Gu really have a way to cure this blindness? The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 264. Gu Yunjiao naturally wouldn't answer. Although Steward Wang thought about the same thing as these people, he didn't dare to offend Zhang Yuzi now, so he said to Gu Yunjiao kindly, if the girl can really be cured, then follow me to see the maiden and let the maiden decide. Gu Yunjiao nodded and followed Butler Wang out. These doctors didn't leave for a while, and they were all asking Dr. Zhang, is this little girl really skilled in medicine? Even the dead have been rescued. Yes, did you see it with your own eyes? It's true, why have I never heard of it? Dr. Zhang didn't want to say that he was inferior to Gu Yunjiao, so he waved his hands again and again, I don't know, I just heard it, and you ask me for nothing. Gu Yunjiao followed Butler Wang to the second door. Butler Wang gave a few words to the little girl who was watching the door, and the girl let Gu Yunjiao in. Lin Chuo couldn't enter the second door, so he waited outside. Gu Yunjiao went all the way in, and she found that concubine Yun's bedroom was on the central axis of the palace. Gu Yunjiao first waited outside the bedroom, and after waiting for a while, the maid opened the curtain and let her in. When she entered, Gu Yunjiao saw a woman sitting on the main seat. She seemed to be in her 40s, with obvious wrinkles and nasolabial folds at the corners of her eyes. Although her skin was fair, it was sagging. However, even if she looks like her age is gone, she is still beautiful. Gu Yunjiao was led by the maid and knelt down. Above, concubine Yun beckoned, "I heard that you are a girl, or a little girl, come closer, I'll take a look." As Gu Yunjiao approached, concubine Yun couldn't actually see anything, she could only vaguely see a bright light with color. Concubine Yun sighed, "Oh, I used to like to see young and beautiful girls the most, but now, I can't even see them if I want to." Gu Yunjiao looked at her eyes carefully, both black pupils were covered by a layer of white veil. The left eye is better, there is still a black circle around the edge, and the black eyeball of the right eye is completely invisible. Concubine Yun waved her hand, "It's Dr. Gu, please take a seat." Gu Yunjiao only felt that concubine Yun's voice was gentle and pleasant, and she didn't seem to have any contempt or disbelief for a little girl like her. She couldn't help but ask, Niang, I'm only 15 years old this year, can you rest assured that I can treat you?" Concubine Yun smiled, "You are only 15 years old, and you dare to reveal the list of the palace. Either you are ignorant, or you have real skills. When you say that, I'm sure, you're not the kind of person who doesn't know how high the sky is." Gu Yunjiao thought to herself, as expected, she was killed from the palace, and her wisdom is not comparable to that of ordinary people. She said softly, "I can cure this disease, Niang, but please let Niang first listen to my method of treatment and see if it works." Concubine Yun nodded, "You said?" Gu Yunjiao said, "My method is called golden needle removal of obstacles. Just stick a needle into the eye and pull out the layer of white veil covering the eyeball, and the lady's eyes will be restored." This method of eye surgery was first recorded in the medical books of the Tang dynasty. Song dynasty, Ming dynasty medical books are also recorded. Concubine Yun was a little surprised, pricked the eyes with needles. "There is such a medical technique. I have never heard of it." Gu Yunjiao lowered her eyes and said, "My ancestors used this technique to cure several people. The operation will not take more than half an hour. After the operation, the eyes will be restored. It's just that although I know how to treat this disease, I have never treated anyone with my own hands. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth." Author, Jinkui. Chapter 265. The ancestor Gu Yunjiao said was actually her uncle in another time and space. In the 1970s, my uncle once performed a golden needle removal technique for Teju, and he also performed this operation for a prince of a certain country. The surgeries were all successful. When she was a teenager, she once saw her uncle perform this operation on someone. Later, her uncle explained to her some points to pay attention to, but she hadn't actually practiced it. Both her grandfather and uncle believed that she was the most talented in medicine in this generation. Since she was a few years old, whenever anyone came to seek medical treatment, they would ask Gu Yunjiao to feel the pulse and then watch from the sidelines. Grandpa and uncle put infinite hopes on her, but it's a pity. After hearing this, concubine Yun nodded slowly. Immediately after the operation, she was able to regain her sight, which made her very excited. She said softly, "I heard that since Dr. Gu is the shopkeeper of Rengzhen Tang, he must be very busy. Why don't you please come back first? I have to discuss this matter with the prince before deciding." Although she has made up her mind to sit for surgery, she still has to express her respect for her son. Gu Yunjiao blessed concubine Yun. "In this case, the girl will retire first." After Gu Yunjiao left, concubine Yun asked for King Kong. Concubine Yun's personal maid said Gu Yunjiao's words again, King Kong was slightly surprised when he heard Ren Xintang, and then heard that he was going to stab the gold needle into his eye. King Kong waved his hand hurriedly. Then how can I do it? How are your eyes? Concubine Yun chuckled from the side. My lord, my eyes are almost completely blind now. What if it is stabbed again? King Kong was still a little anxious. He walked around the room a few times and instructed, go and call Royal Dr. Han. After a while, Royal Dr. Han came over, and King Kong said, I wonder if Mr. Han has ever heard of the golden needle technique for removing obstacles. Han Yuyi looked dazed. I've never heard of this, it's used to treat diseases. He murmured, removing the barrier? Could it be removing the white veil from the eyes? Kong Wang said, that's right, sir, do you think this method can be used? Royal Dr. Han thought for a while, why do you need to worry about your lord? Isn't there a peasant woman with similar symptoms to the Empress, so let someone treat the peasant woman first, and then it's not too late to treat the Empress. King Kong sighed, I don't know. It's just that when I think of taking a needle to stab the lady's eyes, I feel very uneasy. Mammy smiled and said, Your Highness is full of filial piety. If you care, you will be confused. King Kong hesitated for a moment. If so, let her try it first. He instructed, let someone go and tell the Dr. Gu of Rengzentang, and ask her to come over tomorrow to treat the peasant woman. The servant went to Rengzentang after receiving the order. Gu Yunjiao only entered the shop on the front foot, and the people from the palace on the back foot came. Hearing that someone from the palace said that she was going to treat the peasant woman immediately, Gu Yunjiao shook her head. She said to the steward of the palace, to do this operation, you must first create a set of surgical instruments. And the equipment must be made of 100 steel. She thought for a while, come to me tomorrow to get the blueprints and see if you can find a skilled craftsman to build them. The steward of the palace respectfully agreed, and returned to the palace to resume his orders. King Kong and concubine Yun became more confident when they heard what surgical instruments were to be built. Gu Yunjiao took a very thin pen and drew on the paper. There are a total of 5 instruments, all of which are very small in size. Needless to say, for eye surgery, they must be very delicate. Gu Yunjiao drew the picture and even marked the dimensions. She put away the blueprints and just waited for the people from the palace to come and get them the next day. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 266. Close the shop door for dinner at night. Gu Yunjiao usually sits next to the Chen family. When I entered the room just now, I found that Mrs. Li had taken the seat where Mrs. Chen usually sat. Chen is an elder, and he is sitting in the main seat facing the door. After Mrs. Li came yesterday, Mrs. Chen gave her the throne and sat next to her. Mr. Li sat back again, and at first glance, he seemed to be very sensible. Only in this way, Gu Yunjiao became the Li family next to her. Gu Yunjiao sat down to eat silently. She just picked up the chopsticks and was about to pick up the dishes, when she saw Li quickly pick up a chicken wing with the public chopsticks and put it in Gu Yunjiao's bowl. Then she looked at Gu Yunjiao with some flattery. Gu Yunjiao stared at the chicken wings in the bowl and stared blankly for a while. At this time, Sanya blinked her eyes and looked at Mrs. Li in confusion. Auntie, sister-in-law doesn't eat the skin on the chicken. Even if she doesn't eat the skin on the chicken, how can she eat chicken wings? Auntie, don't you know? Li Shi was extremely embarrassed when she heard it, and she wanted to please Gu Yunjiao, but she didn't expect to be flattered on the horse's leg. Chen Shi glanced at Li Shi, she didn't quite understand. As a mother, she raised her daughter to a teenager and ate at the same table every day. What her daughter likes to eat and what she doesn't like to eat, doesn't she know? No. After Li Shi was embarrassed, she was wronged. She lowered her head and pursed her lips, trying not to let herself cry. Gu Yunjiao sighed, got up and put the chicken wings into Gu Chuan's bowl. Li sullenly finished eating, then got up and walked out. Gu Yunjiao looked at her back and thought about it. In any case, Ms. Li will have the act of adding vegetables today. This is the first time in history. She can't dispel Ms. Li's enthusiasm, so she has to give her some encouragement. Even if her starting point may not be because of maternal love, this is still her effort. Gu Yunjiao followed Ms. Li into her room, and after doing some construction in her heart, she said, "Thank you for serving me today." Li was sitting beside the bed and looked up at her. She was sensitively aware that Gu Yunjiao did not call her mother. Gu Yunjiao continued, "When you eat later, why don't you just sit next to Xiao Chuan and give him some food or something? Xiao Chuan likes to eat chicken wings and drumsticks, likes to eat fish but is not very picky, and Xiao Chuan doesn't eat garlic or coriander." She paused. "Xiao Chuan needs mother's care more than me." After Gu Yunjiao finished speaking, Li Shi covered her face and cried silently. She thought about it carefully. Since she came here, Gu Yunjiao has given her good food and accommodation in the past 2 days, but she has never called her mother. No, it seems that she hasn't called her mother since she got married. Why is this happening? The next day, people from the palace came over and took away Gu Yunjiao's blueprint. In a large mansion in Xiangcheng, a woman in red was listening carefully to the servant's report. "Miss Chi, I went to Rengzintang and asked around carefully. The pharmacy was opened by Mr. Jiang's sister-in-law. Now, Mr. Jiang's family lives in the backyard of the pharmacy. By the way, I heard people say that young Master Jiang's eldest brother is no longer there, and now this eldest sister-in-law is in charge of his family's affairs." After Qin Yan waved his hand, the servant stepped back. The maid Luer came over and said, "Miss, although their family has a pharmacy, they are just ordinary people, and they can't compare to ours." She glanced at Qin Yan. "Besides, the person who went to the academy to inquire before came back and said that this young Master Zhang is also a second class in the academy. I'm afraid it won't be easy for the imperial examination in the future. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth." Author, Jinkui. Chapter 267. Qin Yan narrowed her eyes. "What do you know? It's Yuelu Academy, it's the second class, and it's not difficult to lift in the middle." Luer added, "If he really succeeds, the master may agree, but he is only a scholar now." Qin Yan said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? I said it earlier, but I'm just not angry that he stepped on my veil. Humph, dare to step on Miss Ben's veil and see how I treat him in the future." Luer lowered her head and snickered. The young lady was stubborn. Ever since she came back from the outing that day, the young lady didn't want to eat or drink, so she sent someone out to inquire. "It wasn't until today that I finally found out where Zhang Gong's family lived." After Qin Yan finished speaking, she lazily went to the couch. She suddenly sat up again. "Serve Miss Ben's dressing and dressing, I'm going to see Ren Xi and Tang." Luer raised her fingers and calculated, "Miss, young Master Zhang is not Chiumu today, and we won't be able to see him when we go." Qin Yan glared at her. "I'm not going to see him. Just the past 2 days, I'm not feeling well, so I went to see the female doctor in Rengzintang." After a while, Qin Yan changed into a pomegranate red RU skirt, and held a light yellow shawl in her arms. She wore a flying fairy bun on her head, and she picked a few from the jewelry box, a set of ruby heads, and put them on her head. The maids flattered, "Miss is so beautiful, just like a fairy girl in the sky." Qin Yan smiled arrogantly, raised her head like a proud peacock, and took the 2 maids out to get into the car. Not long after, the carriage stopped at the entrance of Rengzintang. Qin Yan helped the maid's hand to get out of the car. As soon as she walked into the store, it seemed that it suddenly lit up. Zhang Shun and Lu Zhu couldn't help but look at her a few more times. Even Ahu's gaze stayed on her for a moment. Although he has seen many beauties in the capital, this girl is not bad even if she is placed in the beauties of the capital. Only Linchuo in the corner looked up at her and lowered his head. Qin Yan Shi Shiren walked to Gu Yunjiao's desk, sat down on the chair, looked at her and said, "Are you a doctor?" Gu Yunjiao nodded. Qin Yan looked at Gu Yunjiao critically. This sister-in-law of Zhang Xiaoki has no makeup, her head and ears are bald, and she has no jewelry. However, this face is so tender that it can be squeezed out of water. I don't know if it was a woman's sixth sense, but when Qin Yan looked at this face, an inexplicable sense of crisis rose in her heart. Such a beautiful sister-in-law, getting along with Zhang Yuzi day and night. Qin Yan stared at Gu Yunjiao, and put a hand on the pulse pillow. "Miss Ben is not feeling well these days, let me see." Gu Yunjiao took a closer look at Qin Yan's complexion. The powder was too thick to be seen, but in general, she felt that the woman was healthy. It was this woman who looked at her with a somewhat unkind look. She didn't rush to take the pulse. "Why is the girl uncomfortable?" Qin Yan said, "I feel uncomfortable all over." Gu Yunjiao thought to herself that this was similar to her mother's symptoms. Seeing that she couldn't ask anything, she took Qin Yan's pulse carefully. After taking the pulse, Gu Yunjiao looked at Qin Yan with a half smile. "The girl is healthy, and there is nothing wrong with her." Qin Yan got up quickly. "What kind of doctor are you? Do you know how to see a doctor?" "I'm obviously uncomfortable, but you can't tell." The maid next to Luer was stunned. Could it be that she was mistaken? The young lady really wanted to take revenge on Zhang Xiaoki, not to be happy with Zhang Xiaoki? Otherwise, how can you explain that the lady will trouble the Zhang family as soon as she arrives? The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 268. Linchuo in the corner immediately got up and came over when he heard the movement. Qin Yan glared at Gu Yunjiao. The reason why she said this was because she just remembered what the maid had said to her before. That day, she asked Lu Er to inquire about Zhang Yuzi's name. When she came back, Lu Er not only told her the information that Zheng Juren had said, but also said, young Master Zhang and a woman in a lotus-colored skirt were talking and laughing. Right now, Gu Yunjiao is wearing a lotus-colored skirt. Qin Yan remembered this incident. The more she looked at Gu Yunjiao, the less pleasing to the eye, and when she finished checking her pulse, she had a seizure. Linchuo came to stand in front of Gu Yunjiao, and said coldly, "Why, are you looking for something?" Qin Yan saw Linchuo took a step back involuntarily. Linchuo was very tall and had a cold expression. Although he was handsome, Qin Yan felt terrible. She shrugged and said sternly, "Who are you and what's your business?" Linchuo said coldly, "I'm the bodyguard of Reng Zintang. You're here to ask for trouble, why can't I control it?" Next to Lu Er pulled Qin Yan and whispered in her ear, "Girl, are you here to quarrel with Zhang Gongzi's family?" Qin Yan wasn't stupid either, just a little impulsive. Hearing what Lu Er said, she felt that arguing with Gu Yunjiao now seemed meaningless. She bit her lip and snorted, "Forget it, I will go to another doctor to see." Ahu also came over at this time. Originally, he thought that the girl was beautiful, but now he only finds her brows and eyes disgusting. He also snorted, "Dr. Gu's medical skills are among the best in the Xiangcheng. If Dr. Gu said that you are not sick, then there is nothing wrong with you." Qin Yan's eyes widened, "Just her? One of the best? Is your brain flooded?" Ahu's face sank. The girl opened her mouth, but she really deserved a slap. "Dr. Gu of our family is going to treat the Empress of the Palace in a few days. You can't question Dr. Gu's medical skills." Gu Yunjiao waved to Ahu, signaling him not to argue with Qin Yan. "This person is here to find fault, it is useless to say anything to her. Besides, whether my medical skills are good or not, it doesn't matter what my own people say. Qin Yan naturally also knew about the announcement made by Kang Wangfu yesterday. When she came out today, she also saw the list posted on the street from the carriage. She sneered, bragging about bullshit and not writing drafts. Where did the country doctor come from, and dare to talk about treating the empress? What a shame. She listened to Gu Yunjiao's words, which was not the same as the local dialect of Xiangcheng, so she deliberately humiliated her. At this time, Lin Chuo sternly said, what are you talking about with her? Ask her to throw her on the street. When Ahu heard the words, he rolled up his sleeves. Qin Yan panicked and said, what are you going to do, and ran out hastily. Lu Er also hurriedly followed her. Ahu watched Qin Yan's master and servant go out, thought for a while, then looked at Zhang Shun and said, could this girl be a family member of Kailintang opposite? I think she came here on purpose to make trouble. After much deliberation, that is, the shopkeeper's son on the opposite side saw that Ren Xiantang was not pleasing to the eye. Zhang Shun shook his head, manager's son's daughter is almost 30, not her. Everyone couldn't understand the origin of this woman, they just felt that this woman was inexplicable. After a few days, it was the day when Zhang Yuzi rested. In the evening, the carriage of the palace stopped at the academy and picked him up directly. King Kong saw Zhang Yuzi and said with a smile, Yuzi, you are not honest, there is a magic doctor at home, and you don't tell me. Zhang Yuzi was at a loss, where did the prince say this? The prince is in good health, how can I recommend a doctor to you at will? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jin Kui. Chapter 269. Kong Wang laughed, yes. It's my fault that I didn't say it earlier. It was the mother-in-law who suffered from eye disease. Now she is almost blind. I am ordering people to seek medical treatment everywhere. Even though King Kong agreed to allow Gu Yunjiao to be treated, he did not give up on continuing to look for a doctor. Now there are still a few people in the palace who he said could be cured, and they are giving medicine to a few peasant women. Zhang Yuzi nodded when he understood, her medical skills are indeed extraordinary. During this leg, the doctor I saw before said that in all likelihood, she would be lame, but she told her to be cured. King Kang's eyes rolled slightly, and he noticed that Zhang Yuzi did not address his sister-in-law. He didn't say anything about Dr. Gu, he just said she. Something seems not quite right. However, at this moment, King Kong didn't have time to think about it, he just said, I have ordered the surgical instruments that Dr. Gu needs. It's agreed that tomorrow I will ask Dr. Gu to operate on the peasant woman. He paused, I plan to watch Dr. Gu perform this operation with my own eyes. Brother Zhang, if you are interested, you can join us. Zhang Yuzi said happily, that's what I mean. King Kong said with a smile, then you don't have to go home today, we are just talking at night. Don't worry, I have sent someone to your house. What can Zhang Yuzi do? He has to answer. The next morning, after Gu Yunjiao had breakfast, Lin Chuo carried the medicine box for her and got into the carriage of the palace. She got the surgical instruments yesterday. It was boiled first and then disinfected with potion. It was the first time for Gu Yunjiao to perform such an operation, and Gu Yunjiao felt a little unsure. She sat in the carriage and repeatedly recalled the steps when her uncle had an operation. When she arrived at the palace, Butler Wang took her in personally. After 7 turns and 8 turns, he entered the back garden of the palace and arrived at a place. This place is a small hall with all sides transparent. The windows of the whole room are filled with colorless glass, and the light inside is very bright. Performing this operation requires a lot of light. King Kong only found such a place after listening to Gu Yunjiao's conditions. The house has already been cleaned and disinfected according to the requirements of taking care of Yunjiao. These days, it is disinfected once a day, and there are people guarding here at night. Gu Yunjiao went in and saw Zhang Yuzi talking to a young man. The man had a handsome face and wore a golden crown. He looked somewhat similar to concubine Yun, but he was not wearing a python robe, just an ordinary brocade robe. Gu Yunjiao thought that this was King Kong. There were two older men beside him. Gu Yunjiao saluted, "I have seen the prince." This was also the first time that King Kong saw Gu Yunjiao, and he was really surprised by her youth and immaturity. He got up and said, "Dr. Gu doesn't need to be too polite." Then he pointed to the two middle-aged men, "This is Mr. Lu and this is Royal Dr. Han. They are both very interested in the girl's golden needle removal technique and want to watch it." Gu Yunjiao nodded, "It's fine, as long as you don't disturb me." The peasant woman stood in the corner and heard Gu Yunjiao's voice. She seemed to be a young woman. She was very uneasy. Could it be that the doctor is a young girl? But her eyes were all covered with white veil, and she couldn't see anything. There was a simple wooden bed in the middle of the room. It is more appropriate to say that it is a bed, rather than a long table. The height of the bed is made according to the size required by Jiao Yunjiao, which is convenient for her to operate. Gu Yunjiao first took the pulse of the peasant woman, and then asked her some information to make sure that she did not have heart disease or high blood pressure. Then she said to the maid, "Help the patient to lie down." The maid of the palace helped the peasant woman to lie down. The Prime Minister seduced me to give birth. Author, Jinkui. Chapter 270. Gu Yunjiao opened the medicine box, rolled up her sleeves, and then asked the maid to help fasten the sleeves. After tying up her sleeves, Gu Yunjiao took out the disinfectant, and dipped a boiled cotton ball in the disinfectant, carefully disinfecting her hands. Royal Dr. Han watched Gu Yunjiao carefully wipe her hands several times, and couldn't help but ask, "What does Dr. Gu mean?" Gu Yunjiao said simply, "Because there are all kinds of invisible germs on people's bodies, this potion can eliminate some germs, which reduces the chance of infection of the patient." Royal Dr. Han heard a new word, germs. He knew what disease was, but he had never heard of germs. Gu Yunjiao didn't have time to explain at this time, and then she disinfected the peasant woman's eyes with potion. All preparations were done. She put on a mask and opened the disinfection bag. In the sterilization bag are her sterilized surgical instruments. The peasant woman lying on the bed felt uneasy and couldn't help asking, "What kind of surgery is going to be done?" Gu Yunjiao gave a hum. The peasant woman said again, "The needle pierced into the eye, wouldn't it hurt?" Gu Yunjiao said softly, "Don't worry, you will feel it, but it won't hurt very much." When she did this operation, she didn't mean to stab her eyes with needles. The needles would be very shallow and only touch the membrane covering the outside of the eyeballs. In fact, there was basically no pain. Several people who were ready to watch came over at this time. Gu Yunjiao motioned for them to stand at the peasant woman's feet, not to block her light. She picked up a small clip herself and told the peasant woman, "Open your eyes." The peasant woman opened her eyes nervously, and Gu Yunjiao fixed her eyelids with clips to facilitate the operation. Then, Gu Yunjiao carefully observed and determined the position of the needle. She picked up the newly forged steel needle and carefully stabbed it from an angle on the eyeball. The place where the needle is inserted is very critical. It has been repeatedly practiced by predecessors and has been studied by later generations. There are very few blood vessels in this place, and even a small amount of bleeding. The peasant woman snorted when she stabbed in. Gu Yunjiao asked, "Does it hurt?" The peasant woman replied, "It doesn't hurt, I just feel something." Gu Yunjiao said solemnly, "Next, you must not move around, so as to ensure the smooth completion of the operation." The peasant woman said in a panic, "I won't move." The needle in Gu Yunjiao's hand moved forward slowly, and finally reached the position she wanted to reach. She carefully raised the layer of white shading above her pupils. The golden needle removal technique recorded in ancient medical books only needs to remove this layer of white veil at this moment. This is a trouble, the layer of white veil may be rolled up again. However, Gu Yunjiao's uncle has further improved the golden needle blocking technique. Then Gu Yunjiao picked up a piece of equipment and covered Bai Yi. She carefully pulled out the gold needle, and then used a small pair of tweezers to pick up the white shawl that was covered by the quilt, and then cut it with a pair of small scissors. The clipped white shawl was thrown into the white porcelain plate that had been prepared for a long time. At this time, the peasant woman lying down was very excited, but she was so stiff that she didn't dare to move. She can see it now? Gu Yunjiao asked, did you see it? The peasant woman replied, I see. The few people who were watching at their feet couldn't actually see any details at the moment. It's just that they all feel that it's too fast. How long has it been for this operation, did you see it? Zhang Yuzi looked at Gu Yunjiao fixedly, only to feel sore in his heart. She was such a wonderful woman, and he was proud of her.